Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the statewide truck parking webinar. I am Ricky Fitzgerald, manager of the Florida Department Freight and Multimodal Operations Office. Before we get into our welcomes and introductions, I want to talk a little bit about the purpose and the direction. We have a strategic focus here in our office, and that strategic focus is to achieve success through teamwork and efficiency. So what that means, we have to remove institutional infrastructure and funding bottlenecks to build a well-connected, reliable, and safe multimodal network. The goal is to enhance Florida's economies and communities. So we see solving truck parking issues aligns well with our vision and mission. So we know that truck parking is an issue, right? We've talked about this for several years now. It's a critical issue for the trucking industry. And even according to the 2020 Critical Issues in the Truck Industry report published by ATRI, American Transportation Research Institute, commercial driver ranked truck parking as the #1 issue for their published ATRI commercial driver ranked truck parking as #1 issue. FDOT has been making progress on truck parking initiatives both at statewide and district levels. A series of statewide truck parking workshops are being scheduled to bring together the truck parking industry, including both public and private partners, to discuss how we can work collaboratively to solve the truck parking problems in Florida. Today is going to be our first workshop of a series of 3. For the purpose, I want you to take a look at our screen and say, you see that we want to describe truck parking needs and initiatives. Then we want to solicit to you, the industry, for your input. And we also want to discuss upcoming partnership opportunities. But most important for these workshops that I want you to take away with you that, like I said, this is a problem. This is our problem. This is our problem individually. This is our problem collectively. So if we can, if more than anything, find a way that we can collaborate, discuss upcoming partnership. If we can walk away with this, I think that will be most helpful for us in this workshop. So let's look at our agenda. Thank you. Again, thank you all for joining. We have an excellent group of speakers lined up for you. I'll provide a summary statewide initiatives, give a brief discussion of what we're doing at FDOT. We have our partner at Florida Trucking Association, Ken Armstrong. Ken and I have been doing a lot of truck parking initiatives together. I joked with Ken earlier about we actually are starting a new career path of doing workshops for truck parking. So Ken and I are really committed to doing that a lot. So thank you, Ken, for joining us. We have Nick Rena from FHWA, who will discuss our federal perspective. And then we have Tiffany Newman from NATSO, who will discuss the truck stop operator's perspective. We also will have Brian Hare from PennDOT to share his innovative funding experiences that we've talked with him about. And you will also hear from our district freight coordinators and representatives about our local initiatives. And we will have for our District 1, Keith Robbins, District 2, Justin Ryan, District 4, Autumn Young, District 5, Sarah Van Gundy, District 6, Carlos Castro, District 7, Brian Hunter, and our Turnpike, Victoria Williams. My consultant team will be Shantanu Roy with HDR, and we also have Diana Elsner, Armando Moscoso, and Stefano. And then we will move on to, while we have a tight schedule, I want to make sure that we are doing good housekeeping. So let's move on to Diana so she can go over our housekeeping tips.
Hi, Ricky. Thank you so much. I'm Diana. I'm going to be helping out behind the scenes here. So I just want to let you know that you should utilize the question box to type in questions throughout the webinar. Questions will be answered after the presentation during the Q&A session. And also right now you're muted and your video is disabled because you are an attendee. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded. So I'm going to pass it. Actually, I'm going to do a quick polling question before we get started here. And we want to know which one of the following best describes your affiliation. So let me go ahead and launch that poll. And the way this is going to work is all of you should have a polling box in your webinar polls part of the screen. So if you open that up, you'll be able to answer this question. We'll give you about 30 seconds here, and then we'll show you what the results look like.
Diana, they cannot click on the computer screen, correct?
Correct. This is going to be taking place in your polling box.
Thank you.
All right, it looks like just about everyone has voted here, so I'm going to share with you what those results look like.
Okay, looks like we have 67% consultants, 13% public sector participants, 13% industry, trucking industry, and then 7% truck stop owners, operators. Thank you, Diana.
All right, thanks. So I'm going to go ahead and hand this back to Ricky for his presentation.
Thank you very much, Diana, and I appreciate everyone for taking time to do that polling question. If I could just ask one quick question to our NATSO members, if you could type a message in the chat box with their name and organization and contact information, that would be very helpful for us, even during this webinar, that we can see who's an attendee for those organizations. So if you could do that for us, that'd be great. Thank you. I think we went one slide too far. If you could go back one slide.
Yeah, Ricky, let me take over. I'll go ahead and advance the slides for you here.
Thank you.
No problem.
There we go. So for our statewide perspective, like I said earlier, we know we have a problem. We've been talking about this for several years. Everyone on this call understands that intimately, I'm sure. So what I charged the team with, I said, we need to do more than just talk about the problem. We need to get to some solutions. And so that is the key word for today, solutions. We completed this truck parking study in March. And the study involved 1, review of industry best practice, 2, analysis of supply and demand, 3, stakeholder outreach, very important, right? Identification and prioritization of critical needs, and finally, development of solutions toolbox. Again, that's the key word. And I'll demonstrate some of those to you later. Next slide, please. So here, just a little background on this study. We have 298 truck parking facilities and a little over 10,000 truck parking spaces in the state. Approximately 1/3 of the facilities are public facilities. This is significant. Why? Because a higher percentage than majority of the other states. For example, California is around 10%, for example. This means to us that we are, as a state agency, we're committed to trying to solve this problem before it gets even worse. Next slide, please. Some additional backgrounds. These are the areas of concern in Florida, and here you probably expect, if you know anything about Florida, the issues are in our large urban areas like Orlando, Miami, Tampa, and Jacksonville. So you can see the hot spots where the reds are. And just not, we have 3,400 additional spaces needed today. But when you think about 10 years from now, we're going to need 4,900. So that is quite a growth increase. So right now we will pause and hand it back over to Diana for polling questions number 2.
All right, thank you again, Ricky. And just to keep everyone on their toes, we have another polling question for you. So this question is the truck parking issue affecting operations and productivity in your industry? Again, make sure you're answering the polls in the poll window on your webinar box, and we'll give it a little bit more time. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. It looks like pretty much everyone has voted, and share those results with you.
Wow. So 80% of the industry is facing some truck parking related problems. So Diana, move on to the next slide.
All right, thank you. That was great input, and it really is not a surprise, but it does speak to what I talked about earlier about we all share this problem, and that's why we are doing what we're doing. I'm going to show you now solutions toolbox, and we've broken this down into several categories. So again, we understand the problem, so let's find ways to fix this problem. To do so with this study, we develop a solutions toolbox as a part of the statewide trucking study. It aligns potential solutions by category with a time frame and a way to represent FDOT's role in the project. So we're not just saying that there are some solutions that someone else needs to do. We're trying to actually champion these solutions ourselves. A big part of it is going to be collaboration, and why we are having this workshop. You'll see in the columns on the right, there are 3 stars means FDOT is highly involved or leading the project. 2 stars refer to medium involvement, such as a P3 and or FDOT collaboration with other public agencies. And then a 1 star represents low involvement, where a project would be implemented by another public agency or private entity. So this one here is capacity. In some potential solutions, I can just name, just to give you an idea, we can optimize existing pavement at rest area and other public truck parking facilities. For example, revising the formula for redesign. So when we are actually doing upgrades and redesign of those spaces, we can add more truck parking spaces. We've already started that at the agency, so we should get some type of return on investment on that one. Next slide, please. Just as an example for that capacity, you can see here what I just spoke to. One example is a rest area, a redesign in District 7. We're adding more space in one of the existing rest area off of I-75. And you'll be able to see this more closely when you get the slides later. Next slide, please. Our next category, we're looking at technology and communication. It involves, just for an example, which you will hear more about, TPAS. So TPAS, Truck Parking Availability System. It's going to ensure a joint exchange for that data with private trucking information provider and interoperability with other public entities. And I would say also with that, we would develop, initiate, and maintain awareness for this campaign to inform truck drivers and freight generating facility managers of underutilized truck parking facilities. And we've been doing this now with TPAS for a while. It's a very innovative approach to resolving the problems that we have with figuring out where the truck parking are available. So this has been serving us well, and we'll continue to work with TPAS. You'll hear a little bit more about TPAS later on from some of the district freight coordinators as well. Next slide, please. So, like I said, TPAS implementation is underway and should continue to on the existing path and begin to pursue the integration of other providers of truck parking information. This integration and interoperability of TPAS data will provide additional high-value information. For example, private truck parking facilities provide 2.3 spaces for every public space, making the integration of private truck parking availability an important next step for TPAS. So that will give us more capacity just by interoperability with those private truck parking spaces. Additional incorporating information for neighboring states and vice versa increases the reach of TPAS. And if you're thinking in terms of supply chain, this is actually going to help overall the long haul or the line haul movements for those trucks. Next slide, please. Next category is partnership. And like I was speaking earlier, how important that collaboration will be. Just to think, you know, we can leverage existing state agency grants programs to provide private sector resources to build new facilities in high demand areas. A new FDOT truck parking grant could also be considered, but it's still going to take a lot of collaboration, and that's one of the reasons why we asked PennDOT to help us out on that innovative funding approach, see if they had anything that they can offer on lessons learned. Next slide, please. Here's an example of a partnership. Is our Golden Glades is a great example for that. Carlos Castro will discuss this in a little more detail later in his presentation. Next slide, please. And then we have policy is our next category. Excuse me, including truck parking and eligible projects type under FDOT SIS. If you're familiar with SIS, our Strategic Intermodal System, it's our flagship funding program for the agency. And also, if we add other capacity involved programs, we can establish these criteria for policy. It'll give us more flexibility to have initiatives for projects for truck parking if we can expand on that. We also have our National Highway Freight Program that will do the same or similar to SIS. Next slide, please. So as I was stating, for example, we have our Freight Mobility and Trade Plan, which is our principal freight plan for the state. It created a new process to determine which projects submitted for around the state will receive funding for the National Highway Freight Program. Truck parking projects seen as a priority, as I stated earlier for our strategic focus, we're giving truck parking a higher weight. 2 truck parking projects have been prioritized for our funding program in our most recent cycle. Next slide, please. So we end with these recommendations. So we have the solutions, we end with recommendations, and this is what we've found. 1, add capacity. I remember talking to Ken a couple of years back, and I was promoting TPAS, and you know, technology is a way to optimize what we have. But Ken was saying that, yeah, but we still need capacity, and I remember that, and I think that is a good point to make. Time and space is everything, so we have that as a recommendation. Another one is leverage technology, and we talked about TPAS, and you'll hear more about TPAS. 3, like I said, very important, build partnerships, collaborating with from federal level all the way down to local level, and that's both public and industry and private. and then updating the policy, which we would have just a little bit more control of at the agency, and we will continue to lean forward to try to make that happen. So here are our recommendations. Again, the key word of the day is solution, and that's what we're going to lean forward to. So let's take a pause there and go back to our polling questions. Diane?
All right, thank you, Ricky. Once again, I'm going to share a polling question with you to fill out in your polls box. So this question is, in your opinion, which solution category will be most effective in Florida? So go ahead and take 30 seconds to fill this out.
Hey, Dan, I am seeing some people are asking, where is the poll box? So if you can describe that a little bit more, please.
Sure. So everyone who is attending this webinar should see a panel on the right side of their screen that has a few different options. One of the tabs in that panel should be called polls, and that's where you do your voting. Hopefully that helps. It looks like we have about 80% of our attendees able to vote. So for the rest of you, hopefully you can find this tab. All right, we're going to go ahead and close this one and share the results.
So 73% majority thinks that it's not just one strategy, but it's a combination of strategies that you need in order to solve the truck parking problem in the state. So Diana, go to the next slide, please.
Thank you, Shantanu.
So as I was talking about Ken earlier, so now we have Ken to be able to help share the Florida Trucking Association perspective. Ken, if you would.
You're on mute, Ken.
The Florida Trucking Association is an association primarily of trucking companies, both based here in Florida and outside the state. We also have a number of suppliers who provide goods and services to the trucking industry, and shippers as well. We number over 400 organizations altogether. And on the trucking side, we would range everywhere from huge fleets like Walmart and FedEx and UPS and Landstar and Ryder and so forth, to mid-sized companies and even a few mom and pops. Our interest obviously is in promoting and protecting the trucking industry, and the truck parking issue is certainly one part of that promoting and protecting. I'm the CEO and have had the honor to work with this group for about 7 years now. I think most people on the call would be familiar with hours of service regulations. The two most pertinent for our purposes here are that an interstate driver, and for the most part, intrastate drivers are in the same ballpark. An interstate driver must stop for a rest period of 30 minutes after 8 hours of driving or before, and must stop driving altogether for the day after 11 hours of driving time. Those hours of service rules have been present for decades and mostly in that same form. Probably many of you are familiar with electronic logging devices, which we call ELDs. Some new regulations have come into the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration realm and into Florida in the last year or so. Those don't change the hours of service regulations themselves. They only change how it's recorded and reported. So drivers must park no later than 8 hours for a rest period, and they must park after 11 hours, whether they have a sleeper berth or don't have a sleeper berth, they have to stop. There's no choice about it. The only thing that ELDs have done is sort of sharpen the need for specific compliance on that. I mean, you can't go 5 minutes beyond without figurative bells and alarms going off back at your company's headquarters. You can't think I've got another rest area, or there's a truck stop down the road 10 miles. Nobody will ever know. I'm going to just fudge the log a little bit. That doesn't happen anymore. One of the things that I get a kick out of is people saying, why do I have all these trucks parked in this rest area? Or why do I have so many trucks on the road? Well, the reason is not because trucks created that demand. It's we consumers who created that demand. Trucks don't go anywhere that they don't need to go, believe me. And they don't haul anything that they don't need to haul. It's all us that's causing this truck parking issue and the traffic on the interstates. So let's play this out. I'm a truck driver. I know I have to stop. I know I have to park. My ELD is literally counting down the minutes for me, 27, 26 minutes, 25 minutes until I have to stop. I'm very likely getting paid by the mile, so I would like to drive as far as I can before I have to stop. But now for that last hour or so, I'm having to constantly play in my head, if I go farther, if I go more miles, will there be a parking place there when I get there? Or do I need to take the safe way out and stop at this one right now, which I see by the T-Pass sign or just by the word of mouth on the highway, I know has spots. It's a really risky decision that the driver is being faced with at every opportunity to stop. Stop 10 minutes early to get a spot, stop 30 minutes early, stop an hour early to get a spot. Those become really, really difficult decisions, and they affect not only the driver, but the profitability of the company. To continue sort of this playing that I'm doing here, safety is my top priority. It's not just how many miles can I go or where's the next spot. I need to find a safe spot, both for me and for everybody else. Am I going to park on the shoulder? Am I going to park on an on-ramp, on an off-ramp? Am I going to park in a strip mall where the lighting's not that great? Am I going to park in a place where there's not much security? Am I going to park in a neighborhood? Some of these are safer, some of these are not by any means safer. So it's not just a practicality issue. It's not just a safety issue. It's a legal issue. What happens if I park in this particular place? Am I going to be cited? So it is a very complex set of difficult choices that the driver is having to make. You heard Ricky say that truck parking is the #1 concern on ATRI's survey of drivers for 2020. That same survey they do not just with drivers, but with the industry as a whole, executives and employees and people like me and so forth. And even on that survey, truck parking is #3. So it's obviously a huge issue, and it's a bigger issue, I would argue, in Florida than in most states. I jotted down, I think, 9 reasons why I think it's a bigger issue in Florida than in most states. 1, because of the long distances in Florida. There are very few states that from the time you enter the state until you get to the major population center is going to be anywhere from 6 to 10 hours. Number 2, we're not a producer state. If we were a producer state, then a lot of the stuff that we need to consume would just move around the state from one location to another. Because we're a gigantic consumer state and not that much of a producer state, that means that trucks are coming in from out of state into Florida in order to provide for our needs. Number 3, many carriers do not have a terminal here. They're not based in Florida. of the companies that I mentioned earlier, the big large companies, only one or two of those companies have a major headquarter presence here, and many other companies don't have a terminal or a major facility where they can park. Number four, most of the population is hours into the state. And not only that, you can't go through our state. If you are on your way from Illinois to Pennsylvania, you're going to go through Indiana and through Ohio, and it's obviously easier to go through than it is to go in from Jacksonville down to Fort Lauderdale and then turn around and have to go back out the same way. That's a long grind. Number five, many times of the year, recreational vehicles, either snowbird recreational vehicles or tourist recreational vehicles, are competing for truck parking spots. Number six, Florida is growing. The problem is getting worse here in Florida because of our population growth. It's not necessarily getting worse in Iowa. It may not be getting worse in Virginia. It's definitely getting worse in Florida simply because of population growth. Number seven, we have very few major in and out routes for a population of 22 million people. I looked at Texas when I was preparing for this. I looked at New York when I was preparing for this. There are 5 or 6 major interstates going in and out of those states. We have 3. And I-10, I wouldn't necessarily classify in the same category of volume as 75 and 95. So we just don't have many ways to get from here to wherever there is. Related to number 7 is the smaller the number of in and out major thoroughfares you have, the heavier the truck traffic is going to be on the existing ones. And everybody knows what truck traffic is like on particularly 75 and 95. And then number 9 is that interstates were designed, which means for the most part that rest areas were designed in a time when Florida was one of the smallest southern states. When in the 50s, when the interstate system was getting designed and built out, obviously over the course of the next 10 or 15 years, Kentucky was larger than Florida was. Alabama was larger than Florida. Tennessee, Virginia, Georgia, North Carolina, all were larger than Florida. Louisiana was almost as large as Florida. Now, Georgia, North Carolina, and Virginia are closest to us in size, and we are twice their size. So you're asking a system that was designed years and years ago to deal with a completely different population and traffic set than they are right now. We actually have the 4th largest truck freight volume in the country, after only Texas, California, in that order. Texas's truck traffic is larger than California's even. In terms of volume, and Illinois is in there at number 3, or at least was, I think, in 2018, 2017, whenever those numbers were most recent. So that's sort of 9 big reasons why Florida is having a significant issue, more significant than in many states. I'm running up, I think, on as long as I want to occupy you all. I'll mention one more thing, which was number 3 on the survey for drivers, and that is detention time. As you get more trucks, more distribution facilities, more traffic, more everything, those shippers that are shipping freight out, or in even more cases, receiving freight, are detaining the truck before they do the unload or the load, which is the 3rd largest issue according to drivers. They're being held at the facility in a holding pattern, like circling above the airport, waiting for the freight manager to actually assign a dock to them, bring them in, and take care of the load or unload. the longer they are detained, the less time they have on their on-duty status, the sooner they're going to have to park. And you just can't drive into Florida, go down and drop a load in Naples, get your detention time done, and turn around and get back out. You just can't do it. So I think I'll give a stop there. There will be opportunity for Q&A later on, if any of that prompted any thoughts in your minds. And I will dramatically hand the microphone and the video phone to the next speaker, who is Nick Renna. He is a data analytics specialist for somebody who's very important to this whole truck parking conversation, the Federal Highway Administration. He works with the resource center there. And Nick, you are on. You go, big dog.
Nick, I think you're muted.
Oh, it just became unmuted for me, so there is like a few second lag, Diana. I don't know what happened there, but I was just saying that I really appreciated Mr. Armstrong's perspectives and those 9 points that make Florida so unique. I have a lot of family in Florida, very familiar with the issues around the state, and it is indeed a very serious problem, not just for the state of Florida, but really across the country. Mr. Armstrong very clearly articulated the need, and I'd like to expand upon that and talk about what Federal Highway Administration is doing. And Diana, I don't see the controls to advance the slides like I was seeing them earlier, so you might need to advance them for me.
Okay, no problem. I'll advance them.
Thank you. So next slide, please. Okay, yeah, so what I'll be talking about today is a few elements from our update to the Jason's Law survey, some of the work that's happening with the National Truck Parking Coalition, what we do specifically at the Resource Center. I work on what's called the Transportation Performance Management, or TPM, Asset Management, Freight, and Analytics team. And in fact, truck parking has an interface with all of those topics. And we're going to talk about specifically the training and technical assistance that we provide at the Resource Center in this. And then finally, those 4 handouts are from us at the Resource Center. And I highly encourage you to check them out. And I'll talk about what they are and maybe what's coming soon from USDOT. Next slide, please. So what is the Jason's Law survey? Well, the federal law, Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century, or MAP 21, required the USDOT to conduct a survey and comparative analysis for both truck volumes and the available capability for our transportation system to support truck parking. Mr. Armstrong really clearly identified why safety is such a priority, and this law was named after a truck driver, Jason Rivenberg, who was tragically killed because he was unable to find an authorized truck parking area. So this included a major survey for public and private stakeholders across the country, and we did the first survey in 2014. The report was issued in 2015. The law required us to do a regular update of the survey and report, and so we did a second survey in 2019, and here were the major findings. The shortage is a real major problem across the country, and it's not only a significant problem, it's a growing problem. There are shortages all the time, everywhere. However, it is more acute on weeknights and weekdays versus weekends. And we heard a lot of qualitative information from our partners, and one of the biggest needs is for our communities to receive information in the way they want to receive it. Ricky mentioned partnership. Partnership is a crucial need to understand the interfaces between policies at various levels of governments and what's needed from the private sector. Funding is still a major challenge because it is a problem and a solution area for both the public and private sector. So thinking of innovative ways to address that was identified in 2014, but even became the awareness built in 2019, and that was something that was frequently cited as well. Next slide, please. So the inventory is increasing, but not by much, and some of this may be attributed to better data quality we received in 2019. What we found, at least what was reported in the survey, was approximately 313,000 total truck parking spaces, 40,000 public versus about 273,000 private. So a slight increase in the public spaces, a slightly larger increase in the private spaces. The trends, like Ricky and Mr. Armstrong noted, are pretty closely aligned to those major interstate routes, those freight lanes of commerce. So I-95, Chicagoland, Upper Midwest, California were definitely issues a few years ago, and those issues are just increasing every year. So knowing this, the public sector does provide a significant amount of parking, but still the vast majority is private, and we have to be aware of the partnership opportunities to work together to leverage the best solutions. Next slide, please. So relative to freight's relationship to truck volumes, we compared the availability of truck parking to the average daily truck vehicle miles traveled, or TVMT. There was an increase from the years of the survey results by about 15% of this ratio. But again, this might be attributed to a better data quality available. But there are new facilities being built, and there are new spaces being built around the country. We were using data from the Highway Performance Monitoring System, or HPMS, so there is a bit of a lag with the volumes compared to the availability of truck parking spaces. So it is increasing, but simply the availability is not keeping up with the pace and demand. How does Florida rank? It's about 34th in terms of number of spaces versus 100,000 daily truck VMT. Next slide, please. And so here's a chart that compares the total number of public spaces in each state versus those in 2019 versus 2014. The legend got a little bit mixed up in translation here, but the blue bars are for the 2019 survey results, and orange is 2014. So you can see Florida is relatively high, just like Ricky was describing, in terms of the number of public spaces available. So you can compare it versus California or Illinois, a relatively high number of public spaces, and there is a bit of an increase in what was reported on the public side. And it really reinforces Florida's approach and philosophy, I think, to the truck parking problem. Next slide, please. So these infographics illustrate the split between urban and rural availability of truck parking relative to the demands. So truck VMT in urban areas is about 47%, but only 34% of the total number of parking spaces is provided in these areas. So you can see a converse relationship in the rural areas, higher number of spaces relative to the demand. And this can be explained in a variety of ways. Land is often cheaper in rural areas. The freight demand is higher in urban areas. But of course, the congestion is higher in urban areas, and it's a little bit more difficult usually to find those spaces in urban areas. So again, this is talking about the importance of considering truck parking holistically in both urban and rural planning, and thinking of the trends and where the shortages exist specifically across your network. Next slide, please. Here's a description of the various groups that we conducted outreach towards for the 2019 Jason's Law survey. What was new in the update of the survey versus the 2014 version were the port authorities. So we actually had 18 port authorities respond, which was a new effort for this go around. I want to especially thank Tiffany on the call, who's coming up next. Tiffany Wozlowski-Newman for the National Association of Truck Stop Owner and Operator partnership with the incredible response from the truck stop operators, and hopefully there's a lot of you folks representing that industry on the line. You can see on the right column, increase across the board with our responses, especially among drivers. Over 11,000 drivers responded, trucking managers, all 50 states, State Department of Transportation responded. So we got a really robust look both at quantitative and qualitative data on truck parking availability, technology, solutions, and issues across the country. What do we hear from drivers? Well, a lot of what we've already heard, that there's a lot of severe issues in urban areas. We heard that a truck parking space is not a truck parking space. There's a lot of variation across the board, but the safety and security are really critical to our drivers. Drivers reported that during closures or reconstruction, it makes it harder for them to predict where the spaces are available, and so the public sector has to be really aware of that. That they're interested in innovative solutions, innovative areas for parking spaces that may not be traditionally be used before. They suggested entities such as industry, big box retailers, mall, etc. They also reported that they want to receive information in various ways, and that smartphone apps and real-time technology is really crucial for them to get information and process it appropriately. So on the driver side, a lot of robust, rich information from there. Port authorities, only 7 reported that there was truck parking on site, and there's various forms that took. None offered reservations, but the amenities and facilities kind of varied with facilities near the ports. Law enforcement, crucial partner in whatever approach an organization is looking at for truck parking. What do law enforcement officers want to know? They want to know where to send truckers if they find them at an unauthorized spot. So, okay, I can't park here. Well, where should I go? And so it's really important to communicate that to the law enforcement community, where the parking spaces actually exist, and not only where they are, but the availability. So they need and want real-time availability just as much as the drivers do. And furthermore, the law enforcement community responded that the staging and queues and waiting at freight generators and receivers is a big problem as well. And that's often where they'll find truckers parking, awaiting to deliver or receive their load. Next slide, please. So another part of the Jason's Law update process was a desk scan, a literature review of the existing truck parking plans across the country. So findings from this include that there are better data and better analytics for the data related to truck parking. It is a challenge for the public sector to predict where the needs are specifically, but there are better ways to monitor where the challenges are, where the unauthorized parking activities are occurring. And there's a broader emphasis now on solutions, not just looking at expanding capacity or specific types of intelligent transportation systems, but broader policy options and partnership opportunities as well, which I'm really looking forward to hearing from the district level staff and what's happening in Florida. Next slide, please. Hopefully, most of you are already aware of the National Truck Parking Coalition. This is something that USDOT was a catalyst for, but it's really driven by partnerships across the spectrum of public and private freight communities. So one of our handouts is the 2018 report on the National Truck Parking Coalition. So the National Truck Parking Coalition is broken up into 4 working groups: parking capacity, technology and data, funding, finance, and regulations, and finally state, regional, and local government coordination. So pretty closely aligned to the 4 types of solution areas that Ricky has been describing. On that website, which you'll have available in the slides, really great products produced by these working groups. They're in white paper-like format. Great tool, especially for the public sector, but also for the private sector, and thinking about all the different solutions for truck parking, what's actually happening in terms of effective practices and case studies from real solutions across the country. The National Truck Parking Coalition met just last week, and we had high-level speakers from USDOT, from our national industry partners to speak about the severity of the problem and what we can do about it and the value of the National Truck Parking Coalition. So I really encourage you to look at that website, look at that report, and if you have any questions on that, please let us know. Next slide, please. So what we do at the Resource Center is training and technical assistance on behalf of FHWA, and a lot of that include workshops and roundtables on truck parking. We deliver these for various types of communities, so at the state level, metropolitan level, regional level. And in delivering these, what we found is that moving ahead on truck parking really requires championship, and I'm seeing a lot of good championship in Florida. Moving ahead on real solutions, pragmatic solutions that can be delivered quick, show success stories early and often. Continued communication and partners. Metropolitan planning organizations are a great example of that. Communication within departments of transportation, and especially with the freight community, the law enforcement community, even business development too, and maybe partners non-traditional for state DOTs. And then reevaluation on a frequent basis, making sure your data is strong and looking at that data frequently to understand how the problem is changing. Next slide, please. Another takeaway we always hear is that one size does not fit all in terms of truck parking. We've delivered a dozen truck parking workshops in various forms and fashions since we revamped it in May 2018. Been around the country, talked to a lot of different people, a lot of different types of stakeholders, and they all have a different perspective on the problem. They all understand that it is a problem for the transportation sector at large, but the way you approach it is different everywhere you look. And just like Ken and Ricky were describing, capacity is needed, but there are many ways to improve the efficiency of providing that capacity, and it really needs to be both a public and private view on the problem and solutions presented. Next slide, please. Another crucial part of our technical assistance for truck parking is helping our partners develop action plans. So we're always action-oriented in terms of how we work with our partners and figure out what to do next. We don't want to leave any of our partners hanging, and I want to make a special call out to Gregory Hall and Stacy Blizzard at the Florida Division Office, key partners of ours from the Resource Center to the Division Office in advancing freight and understanding freight challenges in Florida. And so the division offices are critical partners, and we're really here to help realize potential solutions in any different category for truck parking. Next slide, please. I already mentioned the report out on the National Truck Parking Coalition, which summarizes proceedings from 2018 and prior. The slides that were presented on the National Truck Parking Coalition meeting on 12/1 regarding the Jason's Law update, a little redundant information from what I've shared today, but expanded upon, those are available as well. I've shared a Federal Highway Administration memo on the Federal Aid Highway Program funding eligibilities for truck parking. So that's very worthwhile if you're looking at public funding for truck parking. I wanted to mention that there is a truck parking guidebook that USDOT is developing. It should be coming soon in the next few months, but stay tuned for that. And finally, there's a flyer for the work we do, the technical assistance and training on truck parking at the Resource Center. So those are a description of the handouts. And that is all for me. And next slide, I will introduce our next speaker. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce Ms. Tiffany Wazlowski-Newman of the National Association of Truck Stop Operators, who is the Vice President of Public Affairs. So, Tiffany, it's all yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, Nick, for your kind words. Very unfortunate that I was not able to make your December 1st meeting. We had a scheduling conflict. We had our fall leadership meeting, and by the time I got in there, Jeff Purdy was already making his presentation. So very unlucky for me. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tiffany Wazlowski-Newman. I'm the Vice President of Public Affairs for NATSO. Thank you very much for having me today. At NATSO, I cover a wide range of transportation-related issues as it pertains to truck parking. I am the national the NATSO's representative on the USDOT's National Coalition on Truck Parking. I also serve on a number of technical advisory committees in states that are evaluating their truck parking concerns. So I frequently meet with state DOTs like this that are seeking to work more closely with the private sector. For those of you who aren't familiar with NATSO, we are the National Trade Association representing private truck stops and travel plazas. We also represent other fuel retailers that operate near the interstate highway system. That includes national chains, regional chain locations, and independent mom and pops. Nationwide, there are more than 5,000 locations that fit the traditional definition of a truck stop. And there are several thousand more that serve truck drivers under a different format or footprint. In Florida, we have 65 member locations, and they provide more than 6,500 of the commercial truck parking spaces in the state. Collectively, the private sector provides 90% of the truck parking capacity in the US. And I share that just to underscore that how much that makes NATSO and our member facilities such a key part of the solution to any of your concerns over truck parking capacity. So I was asked to speak to you today about what the Florida Department of Transportation can do to help the private sector expand truck parking. And in order to facilitate that discussion, I think it's important for everyone to just really understand the fundamental dynamics involved in developing or expanding capacity. It's been our experience over NATSO's many decades that there is a tremendous misunderstanding about these dynamics, and those misunderstandings are ultimately what either hinder our ability to advance truck parking initiatives or discourage companies from making truck parking investments. Truck parking is extraordinarily expensive to build and maintain. It can cost a private business $10,000 per year per space if you factor in the cost of real estate or permits, taxes, paving, lighting. In fact, one of our Florida members who I was speaking with recently shared with me that it was costing over $30,000 just to reglaze a number of spaces at just one location. Yet, despite this tremendous expense, the vast majority of travel centers do not charge for truck parking. If you look at NATSO's membership, just 1 to 2% of our members charge for parking. So given that, to the extent that a truck stop or a travel plaza is profitable selling their fuel, their food, or other commodities or services, that profitability is what allows them to then go and invest in truck parking. You know, a truck stop generally operates under a business model that, you know, is designed to allow a truck driver the ability to meet their federally mandated rest requirement, but at the same time allow the driver to access, you know, a restaurant or a travel store, a convenience store, in some cases, medical services that, you know, all the things that a truck driver typically can't access when they're operating a commercial vehicle simply due to its size. So it's through these profit centers that we're generating that revenue to put back into truck parking. And whether a truck stop or a travel plaza operator decides to add parking capacity is based on consumer demand. Like any business, we want to provide customers with those products or services that they want and that will also generate a return on investment. So from our perspective, one of the best ways to make that happen is, you know, would be if fleets were to negotiate truck parking in the same manner in which they negotiate their fuel contracts. This is one scenario that would, you know, prevent a driver from, say, making a purchase at one location, say at Tiffany's truck stop, but then going and parking at a different location at Tom's truck stop, where, you know, if that driver's already made a purchase over at Tiffany's, then Tom's not necessarily going to have any profit from that customer who is utilizing that lot. On the public policy side, I would say that the industry often deals with very conflicting public policies and messages about truck parking. These generally require a lot of time and labor by our industry to address at the federal and the state level. It is recognized and emphasized the importance of truck parking. But then when you get down to kind of the local government, the city councils, the local residents, it's a completely different ballgame for our members. Governments will sometimes condition their approval of a new or expanded parking facility on a business owner's agreement to fund improvements to an interchange, costs that are far out of reach for many, many truck stops. Municipal governments will try to keep truck stops outside of their borders. They'll put up truck route restrictions. City councils will layer special use permits that are very difficult for our members to meet or obtain. And all of that is before you even get to the citizen opposition. You know, people harbor stereotypes about our industry without awareness of the fact that they probably fuel their cars at a truck stop all the time. And so all too often a truck stop will be years in the making and then not be able to get past that citizen opposition. But back to the question that you asked of me, you know, what can states do? What can the Florida DOT do to help? I think there's kind of a multi-pronged answer to that. You know, we certainly ask state DOTs to explore ways to lower the private sector's cost in creating truck parking capacity, you know, whether that's through tax incentives or land acquisition, maintenance assistance. And we ask you to do that while refraining from, you know, undercutting our efforts by subjecting our private providers to, you know, regulatory or competitive obstacles that would harm our business. You know, one example of that is certainly commercial rest areas. Commercial rest areas have been prohibited by federal law since the 1960s. That's what facilitated the development of the businesses that exist today along the interstate. There's a handful of states that have those commercial rest areas grandfathered in. And when those commercial rest areas unfairly compete against the private sector because they have a prime piece of real estate directly on the interstate right of way, it disincentivizes our industry from making new investments. And I bring this up because early on in this presentation, you showed a slide that referenced, advocating for third-party vendor operations at public rest areas. And NATSO has studied this issue. And when you look at commercialized corridors versus non-commercialized corridors, those states that have the commercial rest areas and the commercialized corridors, they have 70% fewer truck parking spaces on those corridors, precisely because our members are not going to make investments in areas where they are asked to unfairly compete with the state. And I also sat here and kind of looked at the Florida Turnpike, which would be kind of the closest comparison. And on your Turnpike, you have 1.5 spaces per mile, which is where the state would operate the service plazas. But if you look on I-10, I-75, I-95, which is where the private sector operates, your spaces are 4 times greater. And not only that, but it's the biggest disparity of any of the 13 states that have commercial rest areas. So I would just encourage you to, understand that will absolutely have the opposite effect of what you're trying to achieve, because it would discourage the private sector from investing in truck parking and in their facilities. At the local level, I would urge the state DOT to find ways to cut that local red tape that comes in the form of zoning issues, permitting issues, special use permits. And in some states, it has really been helpful for the state DOTs to consider appointing a person whose job it is to coordinate with the private sector, because without that liaison, people get kind of conflicting messages, even from within an agency. The best example I have is we had a member out in the Midwest where one arm of a state DOT was asking them to make significant investments in infrastructure, and yet another part of the DOT was asking, that member to expand truck parking, and yet internally at the DOT, those people were not working together, and that location ultimately was never able to move forward. And so sometimes it's the lack of coordination within the agencies itself that hinder the projects. And then lastly, I would really encourage you to find ways to promote the economic value of our industry to the communities in which we operate. Communities really need to understand the connection to local tax revenues and what local tax revenues support. The typical travel plaza employs anywhere from 75 to 125 individuals. An average annual payroll for a location is, over $2 million. You've got employment taxes, local, 200,000 average annual local taxes per location, and then state taxes. So I really think it's important to work even all the way down into the local communities so that people really understand the value that we bring. that is all that I have for my presentation, and I will be happy to take questions during our Q&A session. And up next, we have Brian Hare, who is the director of the PennDOT Program Center.
All right, thank you very much, Tiffany. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can, Brian. Thank you.
Okay. And I'm desperately searching for the slide changer.
Brian, I'll go ahead and advance your slides on your queue because it hasn't been working very well.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you very much for that. And thanks so much for the opportunity to join you this afternoon. Truck parking certainly is a focus area at PennDOT in planning and in other areas as well at PennDOT. And if there's one thing that I've learned in our adventure in truck parking, it's that solutions certainly do require the engagement of the vast variety of stakeholders that are a part of that issue. These workshops really are that great opportunity to start that collaboration and just to think about those next steps moving forward. I really did appreciate hearing Ken's perspective from the Motor Carrier Association. The industry perspective is invaluable. And Tiffany, your words from the commercial truck stop operators, I get that. I think there really are some opportunities. You know, that we talked internally at PennDOT. You know, one of our major roles could be helping to cut that red tape, possibly, and work with the industry to help solve those problems and clear some of those hurdles. And certainly messaging and how we can possibly communicate better of the virtues and the values. Because as Ken said, freight doesn't move just for the sake of moving. Freight moves because we demand it. In fact, I just had an email pop up a second ago that I'm supposed to be getting a package tomorrow, so it better get here. I will be very upset. So that's the world we live in. But just to give you a real quick spoiler alert, PennDOT's infrastructure needs far outweigh our available funding and revenue to address those, to the tune of roughly $8.1 billion per year. And that's only been compounded as a result of the pandemic. So that's to say, I really don't have a silver bullet on the innovative funding issue, but I certainly can share our perspectives on the journey that PennDOT's been on in pursuit of those solutions that could include, you know, leveraging and helping address that funding issue. So next slide, please. Awesome. I just want to start just a little bit of general background on the Pennsylvania perspective, and including some studies that have been conducted. First and foremost, 2007 sounds like a long time ago, and it has been. But back then, we did a transportation advisory committee truck parking study conducted in response to the growth of truck parking activity associated with the 0205 Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration hours of service rule changes. And we also had a Pennsylvania Turnpike, which is separate from Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, but the PA Turnpike Commission study included recommendations for truck parking expansion along their corridor, along corridors identified in that 2007 study. As a result of those major deficiencies in truck parking spaces, the PennDOT transition report addressed infrastructure needs at just general rest areas across the Commonwealth. And there was a truck parking was certainly a key component of an Eastern Freight Summit that we conducted back in 2018. And a key message that came out of that was it all gets down to economics and the value and the highest and best use of a parcel of land. So a lot of lessons learned from that 2018 summit on the topic of truck parking. And I will talk a little bit today about a P3 initiative that we undertook in late 2018 into 2019. We'll talk more about that in a few slides. And we've really gotten a lot of value out of our truck parking roundtables as we've turned them in Pennsylvania, working with Tom Kearney and Nick and the folks at Federal Highways headquarters, as well as our PA division office in Pennsylvania. We've done 3, one in the Southwest, that for the SPC is down the Pittsburgh region. We've done one in the Northeast in our NEPA planning region, and Lehigh Valley area, Eastern PA, was our most recent in August. And they tell me that may be the most of any state as far as truck parking roundtables, and we have a fourth being planned along our I-81 corridor here in South Central Pennsylvania. Next slide, please. And this slide simply is just an overview of our truck parking study, looking at the issues and trends, much like Ricky presented on the Florida perspectives. It got into, and we'll talk about some of those perspectives on the demand and use of truck parking, and we'll just go ahead and move to the next slide and get into that some more. Again, Ricky talked about the demand and the use in Florida. This is what PennDOT's picture looked like, and again, this was a snapshot back in 2007. This is just simply illustrating areas where truck parking, in this case, in unauthorized locations. There are over 1,100 red dots in that figure, and you can see the concentration along our Pennsylvania Turnpike. That's the east-west corridor that you see in the lower tier of our screen. And there's at least 2 factors associated with our Pennsylvania Turnpike and that unauthorized parking, and that would be the large gaps between our interchanges, and also that the limited access nature of the facility of that toll system that certainly limits the truckers from easily and efficiently exiting the highway for truck parking purposes. The next slide, if you will, please. This next slide looks at peak overnight parking utilization out of our 2007 study. That's utilization versus capacity. It's for all parking facilities in Pennsylvania back at that time. So the colors simply represent under capacity, at capacity, or over capacity. And I know if you squint real hard, you may be able to see, but there's the triangles on the screen are Pennsylvania's rest areas that are depicted. Our Turnpike service plazas are the squares in the illustration, and then finally the off-highway, the private truck stops are illustrated as circles in this diagram. So you could see a number of red overcapacity facilities, and that was way back in 2007. So moving ahead, the next slide. These are the key findings. This slide shows the data of those findings with basically 11,500 truck parking spaces. They modeled a peak overnight need of about 1,300. So again, at that time, about 1,100 trucks parked on shoulders and other locations that probably aren't real appropriate, probably aren't safe. And at that time, the projection was to increase 50% through 2030. Stay tuned for updates to that. But the real key to this slide is the fact that it was acknowledged way back in 2007 that public-private collaboration certainly is vital for the basically a win-win situation in helping us move forward. And again, that's why we're all here. Next slide, if you would, please. Now I just wanted to shift gears a little bit and talk about our P3 initiative that we started out in 2018. We have a P3 office, a formal P3 office in PennDOT that was stood up several years back. And we worked through that office to pursue outreach to the industry. And at that time, the best approach to us seemed to be going through an RFI process. So that kicked off in late 2018. So that request for information was to start to develop that relationship, that outreach to the various sectors, to the private sector, to the truck stop operators, and to others in the industry, including the technology industry, to seek their input, to help us see the things that we couldn't otherwise recognize or understand. And those, you can see the 5 respondent categories there on the screen. That's the truck stop operators. And highway firms to do design, build, finance, and operate. A lot of technology was offered up, as well as the private consultant engineering industry and property owners. So, thank you. But just to say too, I'm sorry with that last slide that certainly we see P3 as an opportunity in the future. Certainly the cost is the issue, so that partnership with the private industry hopefully can help us leverage that. But we understand it needs to be an equitable, needs to be make good economic sense. But we certainly look for future opportunities through P3 as a result of that. So that's just again looking at additional PennDOT roles and considerations, because that was part of the discussion, is what can we do? And we heard Tiffany talk a little bit about what the state could possibly do. And this really does get into that conversation of what roles can be, what the role of the DOT can be in helping provide solutions. Understanding, rest areas are a very legitimate function of the interstate highway system. But over time, certainly the burden of parking activity is not necessarily conducive to that primary function of the interstate system. We have limited facilities on site and limited parking, definitely not well suited on the interstate to accommodate truck parking for those 10+ hours that are needed to meet the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration hours of service regulations, as well as trucks parked for several hours just staging, waiting for delivery at nearby distribution or fulfillment centers. It's particularly difficult to justify for PennDOT the cost of developing new parking facilities for ourselves independently when so much trucking activity in Pennsylvania does involve trips through the state between shippers and receivers who are not located in Pennsylvania. They do call us the Keystone State, and there's a very real reason why we're the Keystone State, and that's the vehicles, the mobility through our Commonwealth, east and west, north and south. Next slide, please. So certainly PennDOT has an interest in addressing this problem because of safety concerns, parking on highways and ramps, and the underlying unfairness certainly of enforcing parking restrictions on roads when just the adequate parking accommodations may not be available nearby. But perhaps our agency is best served by helping facilitate that development of new parking capacity off the highway at, say, traditional truck stops, especially if that parking capacity can be built in conjunction with new industrial development that has economic benefits for the state, for the region, and for municipalities. So it's looking for those partnership opportunities that hopefully PennDOT can work at all levels of stakeholder involvement to help facilitate. Next slide, please. So in evaluating that feedback that we got from doing the outreach through our P3, the RFI, we found it helpful to break down truck parking facilities by their activity and facility type. So what you see in this diagram, this matrix basically lays out the green cells that identify the columns in each column with the facilities that are best suited for the type of parking activity. Short-term rest areas or short-term rest at highway rest areas, long-term rest at those private commercial truck stops where they have those amenities for the drivers, as well as staging at or near industrial parks or distribution facilities, where trucks can wait for that ultimate destination, as well as emergency parking. We're not going to talk a lot about emergency, but certainly Pennsylvania very different in some respects, and maybe a lot of respects from Florida. But we've had several incidents of interstate shutdowns due to winter emergencies, due to snowstorms, and the question, and it's obviously been very problematic to the motor carrier industry. A lot of conversations with the motor carrier industry in Pennsylvania on this issue since we've started those closures. And the question is, what can we do to help better accommodate during those emergency situations? Very different than long or short term or staging type scenarios. Next slide, if you will. So just thinking about those facilities just a bit, simply want to point out that, you know, this is a highway rest area, at least in Pennsylvania. I don't think they look like they do down in Florida, but this is what a traditional rest area would look like in Pennsylvania. Very limited, very short term. You get out, you stretch your legs and rest up for just a short period of time, and you move on. Very different than the next slide, obviously, which is our traditional truck stops, far more spaces, and we understand that need of the driver. It's not just to stop and fuel up, but it's also for those other accommodations and amenities such as food, fuel, showers, etc. That makes that certainly an ideal accommodation for long-term parking where the driver can sleep and meet their federal motor carrier hours of service rules. Next slide, next facility type, just very briefly, and we'll talk a little bit about this, is some opportunities that we see in Pennsylvania to collaborate and address the truck parking need. This is not in Pennsylvania. What you're seeing on the screen is the Wakefern Distribution Center. That's in Raritan Center, New Jersey, just our neighbor to the east. Note that the staging area on site where trucks can park while they're waiting to turn, waiting their turn at the loading doors at the facility. It's my understanding that this staging area was not required under any municipal approval process, but was actually incorporated into the site design by Wakefern in order to allow trucks to stage close by, and obviously that would allow for the minimization of chances for them to have delays. Again, we're up north where incidents may be weather related, could be other traffic related, but it alleviates those delays in the last 5 to 50 miles of a trip where a truck may be staging elsewhere, and again, facing those unforeseen travel conditions between the last parking stop and that ultimate destination of the distribution facility. So this arrangement could potentially serve as a model for incorporating in the distribution center site plans in the future. And again, just noting the importance of having the driver accommodations at these locations, again, to address bathroom access, lounging areas, vending machines, etc. So again, it's minimizing. It's not only addressing the requirements and the needs of the truck driver, the operator, but also minimizes that risk for the distribution facility to ensure that their shipments can get there on time. And then similar to that is our next example. This is a Pennsylvania example, a little different. This is the High Ridge Business Park. It's on Interstate 81, and it's Schuylkill County, which just happens to be a little bit north and a little bit east of the Harrisburg area in south central Pennsylvania. But it really is a great example of that Wakefern model expanded to include actual multiple sites in one industrial park. So in this example, you have a Walmart, a Lowe's, and a Wegmans that all have large distribution centers in this industrial park. And the development plan for the High Ridge Business Park did include one parcel designated for multi-purpose travel plaza, a restaurant, a hotel, etc., with over 100 parking spaces. So it's basically taken multiple areas of demand and providing one location to address that staging within this business park area. So again, this is another example where we think there's opportunities for us to outreach with our stakeholders to pursue future opportunities to address truck parking in Pennsylvania. And then next slide, please. And this is looking at our action plan, not nearly as detailed and eloquent as what Ricky showed for the Florida plan moving forward. But I talked a lot at the beginning about our 2007 tax study, the Transportation Advisory Committee study. We're in the process of updating that. That's certainly a top priority, and we moved fast to update that earlier this year in January and February, and we were making great gains. And then March happened, and things took a turn. So we started that started that update. We'll talk a little bit about that. I think we are starting to get ready to move that again. We feel that it's appropriate at this time. So the plan is to get that study moved ahead. But we really just want to see where we're at with the data today and looking at those projections into the future relative to where we were back in 2007. We're in the process of developing our just a couple of other quick points to make. Truck parking is certainly a key element of our long-range transportation plan and comprehensive freight movement plan. We're in the process of developing a freight plan, or updating our freight plan right now, and truck parking is certainly a key in that. I mentioned the emergency parking in Pennsylvania. That is a big deal. So we're working with our maintenance folks and others within the industry to move ahead into 2021 to help attempt to address that emergency situation, as well as looking for those other opportunities for municipal and industry stakeholder coordination, looking at the public-private collaboration opportunities to address those needs. Again, just looking for that. We're actually working another example, more specific in Pennsylvania. We actually had our Department of Community and Economic Development, maybe Florida DOT has a similar office. They're the folks that basically work very closely with our governor's office to help spur economic development and investment in economic development in Pennsylvania. And we actually had our Department of Economic Development approach us. We're in the same building, at least we used to be in the same building. I think maybe we still are. We'll find out in a few months maybe. But they've approached us and said, hey, we do a lot of work with distribution centers, with new facilities that want to move into Pennsylvania. Maybe there's an opportunity for us to engage in this discussion on truck parking. So they've actually joined we have a freight work group at PennDOT, and our Department of Economic Development actually has joined our freight work group specifically to start to help us in engaging with the private sector and seeking out opportunities. Truck parking, I know. And I'm pointing here as if you're in the room with me, but just up the street, about 5 or 8 miles up the interstate 83 from where I'm meeting right now in my home office, there's 2 1 million square foot facilities. They have not been constructed yet, but the site development work has been done. It's 2 1 million square foot facilities plus, I think, a restaurant area. And they use that as an example of, if we would have known in advance, we could have possibly coordinated additional parking there. Because, oh, by the way, that site development is immediately adjacent to one of our way station. It's not a full rest area. It's used for parking at times. Maybe we could have facilitated expansion there. So maybe a missed opportunity, but maybe a lesson learned for future consideration. So having said that, last bullet is simply a freight forum. I mentioned the Eastern Freight Summit. This was our freight plan, as a part of our freight plan development. This time around, we just a little over a month ago conducted a virtual freight forum. Had a lot of great experts from not just Pennsylvania, but from adjoining states in the Northeast, and folks at federal highways as well, and certainly freight or truck parking was a certain topic at that event as well. So again, just another opportunity for our collaboration at Pennsylvania. And then finally, next slide, if you would. I wanted to talk about the data collection that I mentioned that we kicked off earlier. Just a few quick points. We got out early to capture major interstates in the area. So you see 81, 83, 78, they're all crossing through the Harrisburg area and South Central. Again, we're the Keystone State, right? But adjacent to that, just to the north and east, is one of the heaviest used rest areas in the state. And we learned that it was going to be closed for construction, reconstruction this year. So we got out early to try to get some baseline data before the closure of that Grantville rest area. So luckily, because of that, we were out early and got a good bit done. We got to 38 facilities with about over 2,000 truck parking spaces. with the overnight utilization at roughly 2,500 trucks. And also we noted roughly 120 trucks in those locations parked along the shoulders and on the interchange ramps that we're trying to stop. So anyway, the only other point on this slide, in this, again, summarizing our update of data collection, was that last bullet under additional items. We're starting to see convenience stores in our area. In fact, in this area south of Harrisburg, actually starting to expanding and incorporating additional truck parking facilities at their locations. Just a new trend, I would say, that we're seeing in this area, where some of those facilities that were just traditional quick stops, gas and fill and grab a bag of chips, are actually starting to expand, putting in more diesel pumps and such, and expanding into additional truck parking facilities. So that's a very quick snapshot of where we've been and where we're going at PennDOT, and we would certainly welcome any questions you may have later. But thank you very much. I think that was my last slide. Yep, thank you. And at this point, I would like to turn things over to Mr. Fitzgerald. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Brian. So before we take a quick break, I just want to take this opportunity to say that, if you are like I am, blown away with all the information that we've been getting. It's very dynamic. So for the attendees, I want you to stop and think for a minute while we're on break to see if you can formulate any good questions or feedback and comments that you may have, because we need to get to the so what. What is the so what for all this information that you've heard? Remember, the key word for today is solutions, and that's what we're looking for. We really like to hear from you. So we'll take a quick 5-minute break. When we come back, we will hear from our district freight coordinators and what they are doing at regional and local levels. And then we'll wrap it up with some questions, Q&As. And again, I want you to think about all the information that you've heard and what can you give back to us, or even ask us what will help us reach our solutions. So with that, we will take a 5-minute break. Diane, I will say, if you would, start the clock on that, and I will leave it up to you to bring us back to the starting point.
Sounds good. Thank you, Ricky.
So I'll see everyone in 5 minutes.
All right, I think we're just about ready to pick back up where we left off.
All right. Thank you, Diana. So let's get into the district level efforts. So real quick about the district freight coordinators. Here at FDOT, freight has always been important, but we did not have the champions to institutionalize that importance of freight. Now we are starting to understand that a little bit more. And a few years back, the department decided to make an official role for the district freight coordinators. If you know that Florida FDOT, we are broken out into geographical regions that we're called districts. And in each one of those districts, 7 and 8 if you count the Turnpike. And they are championing the freight initiatives and institutionalizing freight. So I think it's very important to hear their perspective on how we are moving forward with truck parking. And to kick that off, we will start with Keith Robbins from District 1. Keith.
Thank you, Ricky. I'm the District Freight and Seaport Coordinator for District 1. I cover the 12 counties of Southwest Florida from the southern edge of Tampa Bay all the way down to Marco Island on the west coast and across to Lake Okeechobee in the middle of the state. I'm going to talk to you today about some of the things that we've been doing in District 1 over the last few years with regard to truck parking. Next slide. We completed our phase 1 study back in 2017, and this essentially was a parking inventory. Through this, we learned not only where trucks were parking all across our 12 counties, but also where they were not parking in our district. This was very important information for us to take not only to our own planners, but to local agencies and economic development groups and cities and county agencies to let them know that they may have an opportunity for a commercial truck travel center project in their area. Along with this, we have engaged with the travel centers on new construction projects in a few of our counties along some of the major corridors. In this manner, if they're having difficulty with understanding our process with FDOT or getting a meeting together to explain some of the challenges that they may be having, or just basically liaisoning with the industry between them and our own engineers to help that process move along a little bit smoother. I've worked with the economic development agencies in our counties and cities to, like I said, to show them where there may be potential opportunities for commercial truck parking efforts. We have one county where they brought a commercial truck travel center in, and this was a rural county with a particularly low level of poverty, and that one travel center brought a huge amount of jobs into the region and has helped increase their revenue through the business that this one opportunity provides. So it's an excellent opportunity to teach these economic development agencies about this industry need. Along that, with the county and city planners, many of our counties have prohibitions against overnight truck parking within city limits and such. So what we've done is work with them to perhaps identify some safe havens within those towns where they can still keep their citywide ordinance, but perhaps reduce it in certain areas where the trucks are allowed to park overnight as long as they stay in these few areas within the town or city. And that way it helps control it so that trucks are not literally parking everywhere. Also, some of our planners have gone so far as adding new rules within their development programs, where if an industry comes in and wants to build a new warehouse or a distribution center, that they have to accommodate a certain number of spaces or a percentage number of spaces on their site beyond what they were originally planning. And that's to help with some of the overnight needs that may not be a truck out of their fleet, but it's a truck that's delivering or picking up from their facility. So we're seeing some positive advancements on that. Finally, we're looking to execute a phase 2 study, probably in late 21 or early 22, based on the developments that have occurred over the last year and in the new initiatives that are coming about as a result of this statewide study. So again, reaching out for all of the, we look at it in District 1 as it's not simply a DOT role to provide truck parking, but it takes a multi-level dynamic approach from everybody involved. And so far, we seem to be making positive advances on that and some great partnerships. So I look forward to things to come. Next slide. So I hand it over to Justin Ryan up in District 2.
Thanks, Keith. Good afternoon, everybody. And Diana, if you want to go ahead and advance my slides. I represent, one more slide, please. District 2, Northeast Florida, you can see there. So basically, I represent the freight coordinator like Keith and my other colleagues, and I also manage the state's investments at the Port of Jacksonville and the Port of Fernandina. Just to give you some geographic context to kind of tell the story a little bit more of the map there. We need to keep in mind, as some of the discussion I go through, a lot of our lands here are outside of the Jacksonville area and Gainesville areas are highly rural, large tracts of federal and state lands, specifically along the I-10 corridor, that are, national forests, those type of lands that, just don't have facilities because they're federal lands for recreation, what have you. And we have a lot of wetlands here on the coastal area. So as you get in the Jacksonville north areas and south, we have a lot of, rivers and marsh systems that, along those corridors that are just enough to accommodate the highways through there. So I just want to kind of paint a picture, what a district looks like on the ground. So I'm going to highlight our study we completed in 2019, last fall. This really took, kind of building on what you've heard from Ricky and Keith and my colleagues, looking at the inventory, what do we have here from a public perspective and a private perspective, where are those pain points at, what are potential solutions, and, how can we move forward? And again, I think I'm, kind of continuing to beat the drum, but without partnerships, as you see, I'll move through, in my study here, it wouldn't have been success if we just did this in a silo. So Ken Armstrong, thank you, OIDA, several other folks, the trucking industry, the truck stop operators, this would not have been done and have been successful. So next slide. These are just things I won't highlight again. I think they've been touched on, but we really look into, as other people have mentioned, ordinances, what other states are doing. I partnered with Daniel Studdard at the ARC. They had just recently wrapped up a truck parking study, and he helped me push a lot of the folks that come through District 2. Well, I'll say this, we are the gateway of the state of Florida. So most people coming anywhere south that want to go south of us or north of us have to come through us. So a lot of our freight moves through Atlanta. So we partner with them to market this study and outreach and get some best practices. But we've also, again, kind of looked at all levels of government to see what's going on. Where are some of those prohibitions? What are some of the regulations impacting parking in our district? Next slide. So these are some of the stakeholders. I'll show you on a future slide here, but these are from the trucking perspective that we looked at, we partnered with to market directly their drivers. I've always felt, especially at the operational level or implementation level at DOT, that who are we impacting out there and who's doing it every day. So we worked with these folks specifically to get to the frontline workers out there that are using our roads and facilities and private and public truck stops every day to get their perspective. Next slide. And to really effectuate that, there's really two phases. I'm in the partners you saw in the previous slide. This was our online survey, and FTA and OIDA as well pushed that out for us. We also partner with Loves. We have 5 Loves facilities in Northeast Florida that really span our district from north to south and east and west to really give us a true cross-cutting perspective. Because as I always say, freight tells a story in every mode, every type of freight, whether it's a dry van, a log hauler, you name it. they all have a different story. They all use different routes, park different places. So we really wanted to get that feedback. And so we went on site to their facilities. They're gracious enough to let us set up a table outside their fuel door entries to really interact with the truck drivers coming in. We usually went in the evenings when, you know, kind of was the peak demand, and just had a lot of good feedback. As you can see there, I won't go in the text, but, you know, we really wanted to see, you know, what was their preference? Where do they want to park? Obviously, private truck stop offer the most amenities, and it kind of gave you what we were seeing on the ground too. You would see the private truck stops fill up first because they have, you know, if I was looking to park, that's where I would want to go because I can, you know, can get everything I need in one location. A lot of them we saw, you know, kind of the next threshold was going to those public rest areas, and then if they could go to a shipper receiver, they would. But sometimes you would see them on the shoulders after that. Again, I mentioned we're very rural for most of our district. So once you kind of, you know, if there's not a facility for another 50 miles and your ELD is going off, you're going to pull over so you don't get ticketed. So that's what you kind of see when you go out there in the field in the evenings. As you can see there, you know, we have several weigh of motion stations in our district, being, you know, kind of a border district on the state line with Georgia. So we want to see who was parking there to get kind of a temperature of how the industry felt about that. Most of our weigh of motion stations have 20 to 25 parking spaces on each side. They're usually a pair, so about 50 spaces at those. We really want to see where is it most difficult to park. Obviously, Jacksonville, Northeast Florida, with the ports being there, and you know, millions and millions of square feet of distribution centers. There's a lot of demand, you know, kind of coming through there. Whether, you know, they're destined for that facility, they're heading to Central and South Florida. And then Gainesville, again, I think you run into there, an urbanized area, but very rural around it. So there's you know, only a few facilities that you can stop at there. So and it's really more of a compact, developed area in Gainesville. So that's the two highlighted areas. And again, we couldn't have gotten the 463 surveys without the partners we have. Next slide. So some things I wanted to, you know, see too, common themes we picked up. We got a lot of outside of the survey, what people were telling us, you know, some of the you know, standard questions we were asking, what are they running into? And again, you can see there we have a time clock of how long people look to park. I think you'll hear this across the country and through, you know, ATRI surveys. And then, you know, weigh stations, perceptions there, obviously, you know, the potential, you know, for, you know, not being able to rest, whether it's actual or perceived, those type things. You know, I kind of, Ken brought up the RVs and those type things. You know, could we create some more spaces that often, sometimes we'll have the recreational vehicle or others parking in truck spaces. And then some of the things we may not think about is the oversized, over dimensional vehicles. They just can't really pull in, you know, if they're carrying an 18-foot wide load, you can't really pull in just anywhere. You got to have special facilities and accommodations, and where do they park? And, you know, we've seen a lot of those on the interstate, but you never really think of, okay, how do they accommodate those? So, you know, just some interesting things that came up. We also partner with our FHP folks and see what their concerns are and corridors they're noticing things. Again, the weigh station parking of something they brought up. And then, you know, on corridors, they see some of the shoulder parking, those type things, and had the opportunity to go out and ride along with them and see some of these issues firsthand, and, you know, put those into our plan and incorporate that. Next slide. This is just, I'll run through quick. You can see a heat map of, you know, where those utilization clusters are. Obviously, again, Jacksonville area. If you go further south, we have a lot of timber production facilities, whether it's mills or agriculture facilities. A lot of mining occurs in the Lake City area, and then timber and poultry processing, and same thing down near Palatka. And then it also shows the unauthorized parking. I believe this was on the ATRI study, showing kind of some of those areas. And you can see, especially in Jacksonville, the west side is where a lot of our industrial parks are, and intermodal facilities, intermodal rail yards. So a lot of freight moving along that I-295 corridor over there. Next slide. This just shows our freight generating land uses. Again, just kind of reiterating what I mentioned. And you'll notice the one up in Hamilton County along the Georgia line and in the central part of the district, that is a big phosphate mine we have in the area. So that's not all one, giant industrial park, but it's classified as freight generation. So I just want to point that out. Next slide. And this is just a needs assessment we did, looked at, 2030 and existing. And you can really see here that I-295 corridor I mentioned, really, capacity is strained out there. And then, 75, again, another area, and then, 95 is approaching it. So just areas to keep an eye on as we plan and do our truck parking initiatives. Next slide. These things, if you can just go through, Diana, a lot of these, Ricky, these are incorporated too in the central office study. So I'm not going to mention them again for time. And, to close out, as part of these concepts, these are just things we saw. Heard from the drivers about, parking at weigh and motion stations. Some are more used. You see down near District 5, the Orlando area, outside of there because of limited parking I-4. But when you get in the, our areas of the state, may not be as heavily utilized. So, we want to look at improving that experience. Different things we could do right now if you've driven by one. They're pretty wide open. Can we do some landscaping? We have inspections facilities on here, inspection barns on these properties to do level 1 inspections on trucks that commercial vehicle enforcement uses. So, we looked at, can we create some landscaping buffers maybe to, make it more of a separation of uses on there so drivers feel more comfortable. Maybe a place to get out and, walk their dog that's fenced off. Some of those type things that are, just little things you can do on these facilities, wayfinding and signage that, that, hey, overnight parking is allowed here. Those type things just to communicate better, just again, to enhance that user experience. These all the concepts I'm presenting are just purely concepts now, just based on feedback we've seen from our study and on the ground experience in the field. So, we're working through it, really not any plans yet firm to move forward in these concepts, just exploring them. So next slide. You can go to the next one. This is just the opposite side of the interstate. This is another rest area in St. Johns County, I-95. It shows that this is one of the areas we have a lot of ramp parking. We talked about, you've heard others talk about on the approaches into the facility. Maybe looking at repurposing some of the site, reconstructing it to incorporate some more truck parking on there, just because there's a consistent demand there. And same thing on the other side of the facility. And the next slide, you'll see in the north of Gainesville, south of Lake City area, just another rest area looked. As they modernize, a lot of these facilities were done not for 53-foot trailers, the modern kind of standard. So as they modernize and upgrade, or we have improvements on the interstates, maybe seeing if there's opportunities to improve these facilities. Just a closing comment. I would say the private sector in District 2 has done an awesome job. I see now, especially in our 301 I-10 corridor, we've had a lot of expansion in the Lake City area, our western parts of our district, and the Gainesville areas. You've seen growth in those, and they really been moving forward to address the needs. So we continue to see growth on the private side here, and as well as different types of parking, not just overnight, but staging as well, and or long-term that maybe a place to park on the weekends for 3 to 4 days. So we are also seeing kind of a different kind of segmentation of the market up here to different use types. So thank you for the opportunity, and I appreciate the opportunity to present. Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to Autumn Young in District 4.
Hi, everyone. My name is Autumn Young, and for those of you on the call that don't know me, I'm the District Freight Coordinator down in South Florida, minus Miami-Dade, and you're going to hear from Carlos Castro, who's our District 6 Coordinator soon. But you can remember me because I'm wearing a sweater. I'm in Fort Lauderdale office wearing a sweater for the first time in the season. It's freezing down here. But we represent, District 4 represents Broward County, Palm Beach County, Martin County, St. Lucie, and Indian River. So you can pretty much just think of us as South Florida. I do want to take a quick minute to respond to some of the things I've heard on the call since I've just been listening. And the first is, you know, we're all here for a common subject, and that is really the fact that we're trying to find solutions. And you can hear just the vast amount of concern of safety and security for the drivers that we have here at FDOT. We understand there's a sense of urgency to this problem, and I think a lot of us have been working on solutions for a long time. It's very frustrating to know that this problem is still very large. And I think the key to that is making sure that all of us recognize we are a piece in the puzzle of the solution. And what I mean by that is that the jurisdiction to solve this problem does not belong to one group. It belongs to all of us, which makes the problem more difficult to solve. So, you know, as I'm listening, what I'm hearing is, you know, we heard from Tiffany, we heard from Nick, we heard from a lot of different people, and all of those things that they're sharing are pieces of the puzzle that we can help put together. But I think we all have more in common, and that is making sure that our drivers are safe on Florida roadways as they come into the state. As Justin just mentioned, we have been studying this problem for a long time, talking to you all about it, and we know something very important that I just want to stress again, and that is when we talk about truck parking, we need to start using, I think, more definitive terms. So the first is, are we talking about short-term parking? Especially in areas like South Florida, when you're coming in and you're trying to make it to the receiver on time, we're really talking about short-term staging areas, and those things look different than full-service truck rest stops. Overnight parking, so you'll hear about that in a second, and what we've done here in Florida, and then long-term parking. So again, in South Florida, one of the major issues that we have is our drivers that actually live in the area need a place to park for long-term. They may not be full facilities that offer, you know, showers and different types of security, but they do need places to keep their vehicles safe for a longer period of time. And the last thing that I wanted to hit on is, as you hear from our different district freight coordinators today, I hope that you recognize that we've done a lot. We know a lot about our region, so if you're looking at implementing solutions, please feel free to reach out to us. And the second thing is, if you're a driver and you see issues in our area that we're not touching on that you think we should know about, I hope you reach out to one of our team members and get in contact with us and let us know more about what is going on with your experience. Okay, so with those three comments, I want to move forward quickly. So what are the keys to success that I think we have? I think the first thing is we need to recognize that from an FDOT perspective, we're going to be successful by focusing on land that we already own. And this was touched on a little bit earlier. And the reason for that is highest and best case use of land. We don't want to be taking public land where it's not necessary, and making sure that we're really maximizing what we already own. So I'm going to show you different use case examples of that. If you're not familiar with the term of surplus and leased property, those are terms that you can use when talking to public officials, not only here in the state of Florida, but in other locations. If you're trying to look for the solutions I'm going to show you, we'll talk a little bit about rest areas, and then think about other alternative uses of public right-of-way. And again, I just mean public-owned land when I say that, and that's medians. But we also have other types of property that are maybe non-traditional in terms of truck parking solutions, and those would be park and ride lots, working with other state agencies like the Department of Ag, and debris removal locations as well. Okay, so this is an example of how we track surplus and excess parcels. These are parcels that we take in order to complete projects effectively and safely. And then when we're completed a project, sometimes we have little slivers of land. So you can see the highlighted green down in the left-hand side. And here's what it looks like up close. Okay, so you can see, again, industrial area. We saw some examples of this earlier. And this land originally did not belong to this facility, but this was a happy accident. They were able to construct some truck parking spaces. But again, the thing that I want to show you here, if you can keep moving forward. Yep. The thing that I want to show you here is that parcel was originally an access parcel that belonged to DOT, and now it's facilitating truck parking and more efficient operations within that land use. So looking at those excess parcels, I think, is a really good solution when you're working with your public sector partners. You can keep going. All right, and again, you know, we talked a lot about the number of public rest areas that we have. So we have 4 rest areas in the South Florida area. 3 of them are service plazas from Florida's Turnpike, 1 truck comfort station. We kind of renaming that Weigh in Motion station. So if you are representing a trucking company today, I think the first thing that you can do easy is talk to your drivers about using Weigh in Motion stations. They do allow overnight truck parking in Florida. And we also have tandem lots, which we think are a really important component of truck parking and making sure that your movements are efficient. Okay, keep going. All right, so we talked a lot about how we used to do assessments and how much we've grown. This was an assessment in 2012. And I'm showcasing this to you not to show how great we're doing, but to show how far we've come. So we're here, this graph is just looking at rest areas along I-95 and showing the truck capacity of each of them. And you can see some of them are green, some of them are red, but very high level. Okay, keep going. And again, you've seen this graph multiple times today, but this is how far we've come. So again, reach out to those district freight coordinators if you can. Keep going. One of the biggest issues that we found was not necessarily that we did not have enough truck parking in a given location, but that the demand was so concentrated that other areas that were directly outside the vicinity of a highly desired area were underutilized. And we're trying to address that problem multiple ways. I'm going to give you an example of one of those. Keep going. Okay, and that is our TPAS system, if you've not seen that already, and that's our truck parking availability system. If you don't know this, please go to Florida 511. Your dispatchers can use this information, and it shows live information of how many truck parking spaces are available on our public right-of-way. Keep going. All right, so just to cover, you know, we've been talking about this problem for a long time. The earliest report that I've read is from 2005, so 15 years ago, and I think we've come a long way, and we should really celebrate that success as a state. So the first thing is that we work very hard to make sure that rest areas stay open for trucks during emergency situations. We saw this at the beginning of COVID. The second thing is making sure that overnight parking was permitted. That policy changed and is now in place so that it's allowed along our rest areas and our Weigh in Motion station. Again, I just showed you that $10 million investment from Federal Highway for the truck parking availability system, really maximizing federal dollars to solve the problem here in Florida. And again, I think the broadest thing is that there are a number of people outside of the ones on this call today that share the concern for driver safety and security, no matter, you know, whether it's every day or even during this pandemic. There's a lot of people advocating. There are areas for improvement. So we're looking at our truck computation form, you know, how we determine how many number of spaces there are, looking at how we can improve the facilities and services to make them more amenable to drivers, and then looking for additional data partnerships to make sure that information I just showed you about the live data, it's available to drivers today, not in 6 months. Keep going. Okay, so just another example here. I think we can kind of skip through these. But I do want to show these other opportunities. You can add all the fields here. I just want to point out that we don't necessarily need to program specific truck parking projects to be effective. We can look at existing uses like debris lots and partnering with other organizations like Department of Ag who have truck parking facilities, as well as looking at alternative uses for our park and ride lots. And with that, I'm going to try to end now. To keep this going. Thanks, everybody. I do need to hand it off to our District 5 District Freight Coordinator, and that's Sarah Van Gunny in the Orlando area.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone can hear me okay. Thanks, Autumn. I'm Sarah Van Gundy. I'm the District 5 Freight and Spaceport Coordinator. Our district actually spans 9 counties within Central Florida. We've definitely seen our fair share of truck parking issues. Diana, next slide, please. Do I have control?
Hey, Sarah, are you not seeing the map slide?
No. Can you please?
Let's see.
Yeah, I was actually seeing it fine, Sarah.
Okay.
It should be on that slide now.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Like I was saying, we've definitely seen our fair share of truck parking issues within our district. Some of our rest areas are completely full, kind of famous for it actually. We are starting to see some unauthorized parking on interstate shoulders and rest area ramps, some of the same issues that Mr. Hare mentioned earlier in his presentation. And these are safety concerns for us. We conducted a study in 2018 to evaluate truck parking issues within our district, and the I-4 corridor emerged as the most critical corridor, as you can see by the heat map there. Today we have a need for an additional 200 to 400 spaces along I-4, and that is just today's need. Think about that for a minute. By 2040, we will need an additional 500 to 800 spaces. In March of this year, Central Office concluded their truck parking study that Ricky spoke about earlier. The I-4 corridor again ranked as the #1 critical corridor within our state. Next slide, please. Thank you. After completing a phase 1 study in 2018, we started a phase 2 study in 2019. The focus of our phase 2 study was the I-4 corridor, traversing 4 different counties: Osceola, Orange, Seminole, and Volusia. The purpose of the phase 2 study was to identify potential new truck parking sites. We conducted a land suitability analysis to determine areas where truck parking is desired. Subsequently, we conducted planning level and environmental screenings to identify preliminary candidate sites. We are also coordinating with our local government partners and seeking their input on the candidate sites we identified through the technical analysis. And we're wrapping up the coordination now, and we're hoping to finalize the list of potential sites by the end of this year. Then we plan to start a truck parking PD&E study early next year. Next slide, please. This is the GIS model our team developed for our land suitability analysis. The analysis was 2-tiered. Tier 1 looked at factors like drive time from interchanges, destination of the trucks, overutilized truck parking locations, appropriate land uses, and so forth to determine general areas suitable for truck parking. It gave us swaths of lands that are within a reasonable drive time from the interchanges and are reasonably distant from residential areas, which are both critical criteria. Next slide, please. The Tier 2 analysis then started to look for appropriate clusters of parcels within the highly suitable areas. We were looking at clusters of parcels that are a minimum of 5 acres with good accessibility conditions. Next slide, please. Our team developed a really awesome web GIS application to visualize the highly suitable areas and the potential clusters of parcels. This visual tool has also helped with our stakeholder coordination. I have provided this link on my slide, and y'all can review it when we send out the presentation after this meeting. Next slide, please. So we'll be wrapping up our planning study this year, and the PD&E study will be getting started next year. Subsequently, the design is scheduled for 2023, right-of-way acquisition 2025, and we'll go to construction somewhere around 2026. We haven't decided on the delivery method yet. There may be opportunities for public-private partnerships. We are also working with our local government partners on potential solutions. We are considering emerging, sorry, hard to say that, technology trends to identify areas of overlap. For example, the state is in the process of developing an electric vehicle master plan. There may be opportunities to co-locate truck parking areas and vehicle charging stations in the same areas. And with that, I will pass it on to Carlos Castro, our District 6 Freight Coordinator.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Carlos Castro. I'm the freight coordinator for District 6. The real South Florida, I might add. Actually, I represent Miami-Dade County and Monroe County, Florida Keys for that matter. And that's an inside joke, by the way, if you don't understand what I'm saying in terms of the real South Florida, to our friends and partners in District 4. a long history of competitive behavior down here, friendly, I might add, friendly competitive behavior. So before I get into the details of the presentation, I'd like to point out, next slide, please, that Miami-Dade County, as you all may be aware of, some of you may not be aware, is the largest county in the state. We have 67 counties and here in the state of Florida, and we are the largest county population-wise. So I think that speaks volumes to the issues that are exacerbated with truck parking, specifically our consumer behavior in highly urbanized areas and highly populated states. Counties. So I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a planning recap in terms of some of the efforts that we've done, some of the results. We've encountered some obstacles, and I'm going to highlight those real quick, tell you about ongoing efforts, and really some of the priorities that we have in place. So as far as the planning recap, I think, next slide, please. And the next one, please. I think it's worth mentioning that in South Florida and Miami-Dade County specifically, we have been working on truck parking way back. I think it's worth mentioning that we identified this truck parking shortage and problem dating back to early 2010 when our elected officials in Miami-Dade County directed the local planning organization, the Miami-Dade TPO, to look at the problems with truck parking. Those two studies that date back to 2010 and 2012 that you see on the screen. The first one, that was a phase one. Again, it was conducted by our local partners of the Miami-Dade TPO. And the initial study quantified the supply and demand back in 2010 in Miami-Dade County for truck parking facilities. The second study, phase two, that was completed in 2012, was a sort of implementation guideline to address the issues that were outlined in that comprehensive parking study. So the point I'm trying to make here is that we've been at it for quite some time. We've developed extensive criteria for siting these types of facilities, and you may have seen several slides from our partners and friends of the districts that talk about land suitability and some of the efforts that have done. And those are iterations of some of the work we've done early on as far as criteria. And that's a good thing in terms of improving our process. Next slide, please. So back in 2015, we completed a planning effort for one facility specifically that was recommended by that Miami-Dade TPO study in 2012. It was a 35-acre facility, and it was actually outlined and recommended for developing a truck parking facility. That is that L-shaped facility you see up on the right-hand side of the screen. Again, it was a government-owned, specifically state-owned land, owned by the state of Florida, about 35 acres. And we ran into that problem that we heard in the past, and that is some of the public controversy. In this case, this facility, we took it all the way to a PD&E phase, a project development environmental phase. And unfortunately, the land designation and the land use changed. And as a result, the project was found to be unfeasible. So here's a perfect example of the early work that we've done, and we have run into the problem that we've heard before. Next slide, please. So we follow that effort with additional planning efforts out of District 6 as well. We looked at 24 government-owned parcels. I think Autumn Young, my counterpart from District 4, spoke about, concentrating efforts on government-owned land or state-owned land, and we did that. This actual effort resulted in one potential development opportunity. It's actually outlined in the next slide. And essentially, the next slide, please. We selected a site, about 15 acres, owned by the department as well, by the state of Florida, Department of Transportation. Specifically, the site is in great location. They had all the bells and whistles, so to speak, specific criteria, land use designation. This site specifically is in the southeast quadrant of State Road 826 and State Road 836. So it's perfect location, as I mentioned, at the proper land use designation for us to move forward. We own it, we control it. And access, it's not shown in this slide, but this facility itself is within 2 minutes of the Miami International Airport's air cargo facility on the west side of the airport. So it's perfect. It's surrounded by a heavily industrialized asset, perfect location. Next slide. Unfortunately, by the way, we did come up with several renderings just to kind of educate the general public, our elected officials, to understand what these facilities entail, what they are, some of the mitigating elements that we could actually include, like security, barriers, noise barriers, so forth, to mitigate the public controversy issue. As I mentioned, this is a viable site, but unfortunately, as it is right now, it's being used as a construction staging site for one of our signature projects down here in South Florida, specifically the I-395 project. Next slide, please. I'm going to tell you now a little bit about ongoing efforts, and this is where I'm going to profile a facility that Ricky mentioned earlier, a Golden Glades facility up in the north side of the county, northeast side. It's actually surrounded by several key access points and limited access facilities, I-95, the Turnpike, State Road 7, State Road 9. Those are actual facilities controlled by the department, and also just slide a little later on. So this is a potential site for development that we're going to be proposing soon enough for a design, build, finance, operate, maintain project delivery. So it has definite traction. Next slide, please. I'll show you some of the concepts that we've had in the past for the project. And I'm not going to go over the history of the project itself, but it goes back to the 1970s. These parcels were, as I mentioned, were part of the, they're state-owned, they're part of the HOV program. And now we find ourselves proposing a facility, a truck travel center. Site itself, next slide, please. The site itself is between 10 and 15 acres, usable footprint. You're probably looking at 12 sites, and that's the right-hand side. That slide that you see in front of you is part of a concept that we developed as part of our project development environmental phase. That was developed in 2017. Next slide, please. So we're moving forward, and that's a close-up of the facility itself. North is to the right. It's surrounded, as I mentioned, by clear access points from I-95, and we're going to be proposing this facility for development. Again, we control it, we own it as a state, we have some funding in place. Next slide, please. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to profile this project. There's a slide in there that shows a lot of the roadway improvements that are becoming online in and around the Golden Glades area. Those include improvements to State Road 26 and specifically improvements to I-95 to enhance access to the future facility. The facility itself, you see it in there, it's a little green spot, little triangular shape. Next slide, please. I wanted to profile future roadway improvements. We're in the process of just finalizing a reevaluation as part of our project development environmental effort, and we're essentially eliminating some of those fatal flaws so we can move forward with a design, construction phase in the near future. Next slide, please. We've already identified the potential permits associated with the project itself. Those include South Florida Water Management. I'm getting into a lot of the details for future delivery and construction of the facility. Next slide, please. And this is how we're going to be proposing the facility, a P3 approach. I think it's worth mentioning that this is a perfect example of some of the concerns that we've heard in the past, and even in this forum, we hear about concerns from the private sector about, what it takes to develop these types of facilities, cost, maintenance. And I'll tell you, if you're familiar with these highly urbanized areas, the cost of land alone may render these types of projects cost prohibitive. Simply said, the finances don't work if you have to spend or have to acquire land at a tune of $1 million an acre. There's no way your finances are going to work to develop this facility. So here's the perfect chance for the state to step in and provide a solution, and that is partnering with a private sector partner. This is, again, the perfect example of lowering truck parking costs, upfront costs for the private sector, since the department has land. The department also has some capital funds to provide for the construction phase, and that's what we're doing with this facility. And, in some way, shape, or form, we're actually removing those competitive obstacles. In District 6 in the Miami-Dade County area, we don't have rest areas. So we certainly have that documented history and need of truck parking that has been very well documented at the county level, at the state level, the federal level. We've known this all along, dating back to the early 2000s ourselves in South Florida. So here's, I think, the poster child of a solution on the P3 side. We are, in a way, providing jump-starting capacity. And I heard that that number, 90% of the truck parking facilities or truck parking capacity that is provided to the private sector. So it sounds to me that the solution needs to include, and I think we can all agree on that, it needs to include private sector partnerships. I think that's one overarching goal that I believe Ricky outlined at the very beginning, upcoming partnerships. So this is the perfect example. We intend to deliver the facility, as I said, via design build. We have a finance component since we have some construction dollars available, but we want to entice the private sector with some money, not entirely subsidize the project itself. Certainly in the state of Florida, our procurement guidelines are actually modeled through the Brooks Act, and that's a federal act that provides competitive evaluation based on qualified respondents. So we're going to follow that approach. Next slide, please. This is a little bit of a schedule. We're in the prime next, and the schedule may slide a little bit, but suffice it to say, next slide. Suffice it to say that the priority for the district itself is this facility, this Golden Place facility. We are going to be advertising a request for proposal contract. And essentially, that's to bring a consultant to help the department develop that request for proposal for the design build contract. We're going to draft a design build criteria package, and all those technical documents that are going to be required so we can advertise a design build contract for a partner to operate it, maintain it, and certainly we're looking for a long-term leasing agreement with that private partner to operate and maintain it. Operating and maintaining these types of facilities certainly is not our core competency as a transportation agency, and that's one of the ways that we're looking to jumpstart truck parking, at least in the highly urbanized areas in South Florida. Roughly speaking, and schedule-wise, I think I envision ourselves, the district, coming out with that actual request for proposal sometime in calendar year 22, perhaps early calendar year 22. Go through that design build process and award a design build contract sometime in the first quarter of calendar year 23. So again, I think this exemplifies sometimes how long it takes us to deliver these types of facilities if we actually follow that project delivery approach, which is a good segue into some of the strategies that I have in District 6 to help jumpstart the issues with truck parking and increase capacity and facilitate private sector investment. We may very well be looking at proposing a request for proposal to entice additional private partners that have existing facilities to expand those. We're working with our local partners with major load centers like Miami International Airport, Miami-Dade, and Port Miami. Partnering agreements with those agencies and the county itself for leveraging land that's owned by the county, by the state, and that's a way to subsidize and help the private sector make the kinds of investments that are necessary, specifically in the highly urbanized areas that I mentioned. It is very difficult to make the finances work. We've done plenty of work on the planning side. Now we're moving towards the phases where we can actually deliver these types of facilities. And that's the process. But I think, as some of you had pointed out, I think we're looking at a combination of strategies to solve the problems we have with truck parking. With that, I'm going to cut my time short, and I'm going to pass it on to our colleague and our friend, District 7 Coordinator Brian Hunter. Brian, the floor is yours.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brian Hunter. I'm the Freight Coordinator in District 7, which is in the Tampa Bay area. So currently we have two projects that are adding about 120 truck parking spots to the rest areas on I-75 south of Tampa, which will make it over 100 or 200 spots down there. But we recognize that that's not really enough. So we've identified two areas that we're going to focus our truck parking efforts on as places that need more capacity. These were identified in the statewide truck parking study. So the first one is on the screen. It's along County Line Road and I-4 in the Plant City and Lakeland area. We have gone through the process. We've identified particular parcels, and we have funding next fiscal year to acquire some right of way to begin building these facilities. And this facility will serve the I-4 corridor. And as you've seen in all the other presentations, that is a highly critical corridor for truck parking in the state. Next slide. The second area that we're looking at is on I-75 in the Pasco and Hernando area. So in between State Road 50 and State Road 52, which is about 30 miles north of Tampa Bay, or Tampa itself. And so we're just starting the process in those areas right now to identify particular locations that we would want to put one of these facilities. And so at this point, we don't know what our procurement or development method for these facilities is going to be. And so we're going to explore all those options. It may be, okay, we're definitely going to work on incorporating the private sector as one of those options that we're going to look into and to build these projects out to fruition. So those are the two opportunities we have for truck parking in District 7. Stay tuned. Those will be coming up for development soon enough. And now I'm going to pass it over to Turnpike, Victoria Williams.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Appreciate that. I have a slide deck of about a dozen pages of content, and I would like to talk about Florida's Turnpike Enterprise. We are a statewide system of limited access toll facilities. Some call us the 8th district of the Turnpike of FDOT. We are the tolling arm of Florida's DOT. We have no state or federal funds that are used in our projects or management of the Turnpike, no taxes. We're self-financed through tolls, plus a little bit of revenue from some service plaza and advertising. We are the largest toll system in Florida, and we serve about 3 million customers a day. If you can move the slide forward, please. Thank you. So you can see that the distance of the Turnpike system is about 500 miles, and we are very pleased to be operating a mainline system of 320 miles. That's when we started in stages in 1957. We've gone further out. We have expanded. There are systems now on department-owned roads, 173 miles, like Alligator Alley and Sunshine Skyway. We also have department bridges at department-operated bridge locations, and there's about 19 miles of those. Next slide. So if you add all the lane miles up, when you consider all the existing lanes, we've got 2,400 total lane miles, all of it covered with fiber optic and closed circuit TV cameras. These are installed to monitor, they're all monitored 24/7 by our staff who are watching for safety issues and traffic problems as they may occur in real time so that we can dispatch the help and keep traffic rolling. Right now, there are 144 interchanges on our system. And of course, more are being planned as needs arise across different regions due to the growth in our state. Next slide. And this is where you'll see truck parking areas that are on the system. There are 266 in total. The number of spots are shown individually for each plaza. The list corresponds with the map on the right, and you can see all 8 truck parking locations geographically. Next slide, we'll talk about a project that is funded in Osceola County at Canoe Creek Service Plaza. We'd like to highlight that we're going to add 39 new truck parking spots and 2 new tandem parking spaces. This is programmed in the year 2026. And you can see here the rendering that we have of that improvement. Next slide, another service plaza that is coming up soon in fiscal year 2023. We've programmed funds to enhance and add 19 new truck parking spots with an additional tandem space. And we're seeing this need very dramatically with trucks that fill up the ramps on the ways in and the ways out of that service plaza. We are also looking at further expansion. In our next slide, you'll see the 4 more service plazas that are being evaluated right now for options for future needs at Pompano, up at Port St. Lucie, Fort Pierce Plaza, further up in Fort Drum, and then Okahumpka Plaza. The next slide talks about Turnpike tandems. You heard a little bit about that. Well, there's a Florida statute that the Turnpike does have authority to regulate these tandem trailers. The definition of the difference in the tandem trailer and a Turnpike tandem trailer is because of the size. You can see that these would create a bigger problem traveling on the road. So Turnpike tandem trailers have restrictions by Florida statute 316.515. That means drivers must plan their routes very carefully and stay on designated roadways that they're allowed to drive on. In our next slide, you'll see further guidelines are outlined in the Florida Administrative Code. And last year, our legislature made updates as well, which slightly loosened some of those prohibitions. There are very restrictive and limited authorities still to travel on routes located just off the Florida Turnpike system. You know, the Turnpike tandems are never allowed to drive on any interstate highway system, just too dangerous. They must coordinate and have travel authorization by local network authorities. The Turnpike has a lot of details on our website, but they need to have a route-specific blanket permit. And in that approval, the Turnpike does review the load. It looks at the safety of the vehicle itself. It pretty much does authorize travel on the state roads and really within 15 miles from the Turnpike to and from interlogistics centers, seaports, and other designated staging areas. For example, there's one on Sawgrass Expressway, which is another in Broward County of the Florida's Turnpike. The routes and turning movement radius at these intersections are really scrutinized for safe travel, considering the large length needs of that tandem vehicle configuration. So let's look at a map next, and it'll show those 11 locations on the next slide where there's parking for tandem trucks. This list was created and includes the FDOT District 6 lot at Golden Glades Interchange. And we're also highlighting the 7 official staging lots for tandems. This is where we say that the truck and trailers can make up and break up. This is obviously an essential part of the work for that trucker, is to move that load and make it where it can be traveling safely. We can see now on our next slide, brand new tandem truck parking lot, just open. We're really proud of this. Take a look at that slide, brand new view of the new lot, looking south of the existing Turkey Lake Service Plaza. So this actually replaces a tandem lot that had been located at I-4. This one in Turkey Lake Service Plaza for the Turnpike is going to provide spaces. It does provide spaces now for 25 tandem trucks, 44 dollies, and 15 trailers. So remember, because of this relocation, we feel it's an upgrade for the truck drivers. They now have resources of the Turnpike Service Plaza available to use, such as access to coffee, food, restrooms, and such as that. So in our last slide, I'll wrap it up by talking about the future. We're looking at the fact that the Turnpike has a facility called SunTrax, located in Polk County. It's at the forefront of testing future technology advancements, and it's very innovative. It supports a wide variety of transportation scenarios. It uses different environments, it uses different tolling systems and different platforms based on connected vehicle technology. The SunTrax facility has the potential to test laser-based tolling systems for different shaped vehicles. These are also a wide variety of mixtures of traffic scenarios, such as your highway. Also, autonomous vehicle testing occurs, and the Turnpike has been had real-time platooning tests successfully using the Turnpike to run truck platooning. And this freight delivery testing using drones is another capability. The last thing to talk about is how to pay your tolls the least expensive way, and that's going to be using a transponder. In Florida, this SunPass is a system that will be interoperable at Georgia, North Carolina, and we also are working through to become a part of the Easy Pass network. 18 more states are coming on, as you see on that map. This system is less expensive than if you don't use a transponder, a prepaid toll account. You are going to need to pay a little higher toll, approximately 25% more on the toll rate. Plus, we have to mail it to you. So you're going to pay an administrative charge for that. So we're looking forward to getting into more states with our system, and being interoperable is a very convenient way for a lot of travelers to operate. So that's all right now from the Turnpike, and we do appreciate your time, and our Turnpike team put together this outreach for you with a variety of the things that we're involved with. Thank you for your time.
All right, Victoria, thank you so much. So we are right at 4:15. We have approximately 10 minutes or so, and we have been receiving some questions through the chat box. First off, I think this was excellent set of presentations, so thank you very much. Really fascinating information. Diana, if you could turn on the cameras for Ricky, Ken, Nick, Tiffany, and Brian, please. And while you were doing that, there was one question from several of you about if you could get a copy of the presentation. The answer is yes. Everything that we presented today is going to be posted on the FDOT site, and we will send out a link to you for you to download those materials. So the first question I have here, I think this is for Ricky. So Ricky, the question is that there is a perception that truck parking is a private sector issue. Why is it important to FDOT?
So good question. Thank you. And thank you for the question. It's important for us. Think about it in terms of safety, security, and mobility. We think about, if you heard me say earlier about our strategic focus, how we want to remove those bottlenecks and making it a well-connected, reliable, and safe multimodal network. If we have truck parking, truck parking issues, that is going to create, one, let me start with mobility issues. If truck drivers are taking up to 30 minutes to find parking, that is adding a volume back to our capacity for when they're driving around. That also adds to increased safety hazards as well. And then you can also add in the security hazards for them when they're trying to find alternative places to park. So that is a direct problem for us at FDOT. We want to make sure that we are curing these problems. But on the more positive side too as well, if we are making it easier for drivers and carriers to find places for parking and staging, we're enhancing our supply chain and that freight mobility throughout our network as well.
Thank you, Ricky. Excellent answer. So the next one is for Ken. Ken, so you talked about working closely with Ricky. What is the relationship between FTA and FDOT? How do you guys work together?
I don't know whether our relationship is unique to Florida, but whether you're talking about Highway Patrol, Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles, Department of Revenue, FDOT, certainly, it feels like it just is a natural conversation and relationship for us to constantly, and I do mean that, be picking up the phone, sending a text, So our relationship is, I think, second to none. I can't imagine that any state has a better relationship with state government and with the Department of Transportation specifically. I really liked the fact that Tiffany and Nick were on this, and I'm looking forward to working on the relationship with them. We don't spend as much time with the other national associations as we do with the state. But the fact that Nick and Tiffany have said that Florida is important to them, which I mean, I should have known that, but I didn't know Nick and Tiffany before. Now I do. So it's going to be easier, I think, to expand the strong relationship that we have with FDOT and other state agencies to more of those national groups, because Florida is obviously a very important state, and it's natural that we would work together with them.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Ken. So I guess a follow-up to that for Nick. So Nick, tell us about how FHWA can help Florida to solve truck parking problems.
Well,
more money, Nick, more money.
Yeah, well, first of all, $10 million was already awarded to Florida for the TPAS system through our Fast Lane discretionary grant program. And discretionary grant programs are offered pretty regularly. You can look at Tiger Now Build programs, and there's usually opportunities to apply for those. But beyond that, there's plenty of federal aid flexibilities, and that's something I would encourage anyone, especially at FDOT, to work with the division office in figuring out what are the opportunities for federal funding there. The sample memo I provided is just one example. The other big thing is, in coordination is in the planning process, where you're really making the business case for truck parking solutions towards better highway safety, better transportation safety overall. And Tiffany mentioned the profitability aspect of it. Well, there's definitely a broader public societal benefit. And that's something we definitely have resources for. We can provide you, with the data and information and case studies, technology transfer from across the country. We gather effective practices, and just scans of what other folks are doing around the country. And that's something we often bring into our workshops and roundtables, are those national subject matter experts like Brian for sure. And so we can definitely continue doing that with Florida. Great. Thank you, Nick, so much. Yeah, and we do work very closely with Greg and Stacy, so we will ask them for more funding for sure. So, all right, the next one, I think this goes with Tiffany's topic. So, Tiffany, you talked about the profitability and local government kind of perceptions about truck parking, and we often hear that truck parking brings pollution, noise, crime to local communities. And a lot of the times, local governments say, well, we don't really need truck parking in our backyard. What's the message to them?
So the message to them, I think, is focused on a number of different things. Certainly, going back to the point that someone made earlier, trucks are on the road because Americans are making purchases, and we're buying freight and products. And you can see during COVID what a huge transition there has been in the online shopping trend. I mean, that's just gone up exponentially. So I think that you really have to take a look at the fact that trucks are out on the road providing us with the lifestyle that we want and all the things that we need to live. So I think it's about tying it to economics, It's about, in terms of our locations, again, it's about tying it to what are the things that we're providing to the community in terms of those revenues and jobs. And again, I really truly believe that a lot of people visit truck stops all the time to fill up their cars. I know I do, and I think a lot of people just don't realize that they are filling at a truck stop. And so part of it is dispelling those stereotypes about what a truck stop from eons ago may or may not have been.
Yep. Excellent. Thank you, Tiffany. I think the next one maybe for Brian. So Brian, you talked about your P3 RFP, and I think you are probably one of the very few states who has already looked at P3 RFP. So can you talk about, and I know we are short in time, so maybe very shortly, some of your key things you learned from that process, and how would you do it, differently if you had to do it again?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I appreciate that because it's to me and to PennDOT, I think it's all about exploring those stakeholder interests. One of the things that we focused on is the fact that kind of the most important thing about the P3 is to help understand what the various parties have and as well as what the various parties need. So in our perspective from PennDOT at a DOT, what we need is additional capacity for truck parking on our roadways, and support financially to help move that forward. But what we have is real estate. We heard some of the districts talk about that and their excess real property and such. We have some limited access to outside funding, such as the federal grants and such, the opportunities that Nick outlined just a moment ago. And perhaps PennDOT could help, or a DOT could help leverage that the partner, that P3 partnership, and helping to get other private funds or other sources of funding. But I would say it's related to that. And if we had to do it over again, we'd probably get a little more refined in our outreach with those stakeholders and maybe be more specific and deliberate in who we're reaching out to. And I'd say one example of that, as far as a deeper dive with stakeholders, is looking for those entities that may have the capacity to provide, pardon the pun, capacity to provide the additional truck parking capacity for our facilities, such as the private sector trucks, commercial truck stop operators, or those industrial developers or real estate developers that may have that ability through their efforts to actually support and help us leverage additional truck parking. So that would probably be our main focus, would be getting more refined in who we reached out to and refining the issues now that we have a little better insight.
Great. Thank you, Brian. So I think we may have time for one more question, last question, and this is probably best answered by Sarah from District 5. So we talked a lot about the long haul truck parking needs, hours of service, but then there are also local government issues, kind of the last mile, first mile type of challenges. Are you all working with the local government partners? Maybe Sarah, can you answer that?
Yes, we are. We're currently working actually with one of our biggest partners we're working with now is the folks over at Orange County. They are actually having a lot of issues with unauthorized truck parking on their local roads and in their neighborhoods, mostly like the overnight parking by truck owners within the neighborhood. So we're going to start working with them to help them solve these issues.
Awesome. Thank you. So I think that's all the time we have. I know Diana has a couple of polling questions, and then Ricky is going to close. So Diana, you want to do the polling question very quickly?
Yeah, sure. I'll take a second to just give you the fourth polling question here. And this one asks, given the information shared today, how would you rate Florida's readiness to solve the truck parking issue?
This question is like an exam question for us.
This is what we need to know.
That is true.
All right, it looks like just about everyone has voted here.
All right, let's
I'll go ahead
see.
and close it and then share that.
Okay. All right, good. So that 4%,
63.
please give me a call.
Yep. So Dana, go to the next one. We almost, ran out of time here.
Okay, last question of the day. On a scale of 1 to 5, how interested are you in solving Florida's truck parking issue? All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this.
Wow, perfect. Excellent. 74% ready to go. So I think, Ricky, that's all we have. So it's your turn to close.
Thank you very much. Thank you again, everyone. This has been outstanding. I know it has been some outstanding information that we've received. I really like to say thank you to our presenters here. We had starting from Ken, giving us that perspective of who's keeping us grounded and connected with the industry that's in Florida with the FTA. We really were glad to hear from Nick from FHWA, giving us that federal perspective and helping us to understand how we connect at a federal level. Really, really eye-opening and refreshing to hear from Tiffany from NATSO so that we can hear the other side of the story, and it was very helpful. And very much thank you to Brian for our partnership, from listening to us and giving us some lessons to learn. I really like that. Thank you very much. And of course, our district freight coordinators, you can see how connected they are to our issues and how hard they are working to institutionalize freight throughout our agency. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to the team. I think we was able to accomplish our purpose for describing the truck parking needs and initiatives. And we did solicit to the industry, and then we discussed upcoming partnerships. So thank you very much. I think we met our purpose. And again, be prepared to join us again for the follow-up workshops that we will have. And if you have any questions, you have our contact information. Please give us a call, and I look forward to our next workshop. Thank you.